Well, welcome back. We are continuing on in our conversational exposition of Exodus 21, 22, and 23, and it's been going pretty good. And we find ourselves in the middle of chapter 23, and starting up at verse 10. Who wants to go for it?
I'll give it a shot. So 6 years you shall sow your land and gather it in its produce. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat. And what they leave, the beasts of the field may eat. In like manner you shall do with your vineyard and your olive grove. 6 days you shall do your work, and on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your female servant, and the stranger may be refreshed. And in all that I have said to you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, nor let it be heard from your mouth.
Right, a lot of this has to do with the Sabbath principle, doesn't it? But the Sabbath principle, now we're accustomed to think of the Sabbath having to do with one day out of the week, right? 6 days you shall work, the 7th day you take off. But now it's applied, verse 10, unto the land. How do they apply that?
So it says that you shall work the land for 6 years, but in the 7th year, just let it rest. Don't work it. Give your cattle a rest. Give your servants a rest. Give everyone a rest.
All right, well then how do I eat?
Well, you should have enough to eat from.
Okay, you saved, right?
You save up. You plan for that 7th year to be a restful year.
Okay, but then doesn't some just grow up spontaneously without me planting?
Right.
And that's cool too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not your intention.
Right.
You're not going out there to plant and to reap.
Exactly.
You're letting it rest, and whatever happens will happen.
Well, this is probably brilliant agricultural management. I mean, I'm not a farmer, nor the son of a farmer, so I don't know anything about, but I understand that it's possible to overwork a piece of land and cause it to lose its nutrients. So this has got to be something good to let the land lie fallow 1 out of every 7 years.
I kind of remember reading about in school farmers who would rotate, right? Rotate their crops around, so it would be better. I also see, I don't know, is there a little bit of a principle, a general heart too? We talked about the servant, the slave. He would serve 6 years. In the 7th year, he'd go free. So it's kind of almost like a little continuity here, it seems like.
Well, that's right. I mean, God, work for 6, 7th, you're free. That kind of principle is being reinforced all over again. Now, in verse 11, it says something here. I'll ask you guys what it means. It says that the poor of your people may eat. Well, what was another thing about the Sabbath year, and how would it give the poor of your people something to eat?
You talked a little bit about how the land would continue growing, or if there were crops that sprang up, that would be the time for the poor to go out and to harvest those crops for their own selves.
So it was kind of a way to provide for the poor, and then you weren't giving them a loaf of bread, but what would you do for them?
They started to give them the wheat, the grain, but they started to go pick the grain, thresh it, grind it,
process it, all of that.
But at least they were able to receive. I was kind of thinking about Ruth. What was it, Ruth?
Perfect example.
Yeah, following behind the other.
Ruth is what we would call a gleaner. Yeah. And later on in other places of the law, God says, don't harvest the corners of your field. Yeah. And he would say, if you drop a little bundle of grain, leave it behind. The poor can use that.
But not just a handout. They'd have to go pick it up. They have to go gather it, be out there.
Why do you think God values that, or has put that in, that they're to work for what they have? Why do you think that's important to God?
Well,
and not they just sit back and you just...
I mean, we've seen it pretty powerfully here. God has a real compassion on the poor. There's no doubt about it. You can't read these chapters without picking that up. But nevertheless, there's a responsibility on the poor as well. And the responsibility is to work, to work for what they can get. Yeah. And so both things work together. They're not to be put in contradiction to each other.
At the same time, the landowner was not just to maximize his profit, get all the land, glean all that he can, nonstop. It was an idea. No, you don't got to maximize. You're going to help people out, spread the wealth down, and look out for those around you.
Well, I mean, without trying to sound too trite or just throw out a slogan, I mean, they were to have a care for people and not only profits. I mean, I think God thought it was fine if they had a concern for profits.
Right.
But not only to care about profits, but to also care about people. Now, let me ask you a question. Did Israel observe this? Did they keep this 1 out of 7 years, let the land lie fallow? Is that how it worked out in their history?
No.
No. So what happened because they didn't keep this? Well, later on, I'll tell you, both from Leviticus and Second Chronicles, God said this: if you don't give the land its years of rest, I'll take the land and give it its rest.
Wow.
So that determined the years of Israel's exile in Babylon. They
That's
missed
right.
70 Sabbath years, so God sent them off to exile for 70 years.
Interesting.
He said, hey man, I'm going to get my Sabbath years one way or another. I'll get it. It would have been better for you if you would have given to me in obedience all along the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. All right, verse 12, on your seventh day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may rest. God cares about the animals.
He does.
Don't work them 7 days a week. I mean, this is kind of sweet from the heart of God that he cares for his creation. Even the donkey, God cares about. And then finally, what does it end with there in verse 13?
It says, and in all that I have said to you, be circumspect and make no mention of the name of other gods, nor let it be heard from your mouth.
I think it's connecting this with the Sabbath. You were to keep the Sabbath unto God alone. You know, later on in their history, Israel had this problem with Baal, Ashtoreth, Molech, these other pagan gods. And God said, don't you ever set the Sabbath aside to them. It belongs to me only. And God was the only one to be worshipped with that.
What a challenge.
So good, the Sabbath principle working itself out not only on the days of the week, but the years of a unit of 7, and for animals and everything besides. Good. All right, let's pause here and we'll pick it up next time.